Welcome to a conversation with Zainah Anwar, Project Director for MUSAWAH, a global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family. Zainah was formerly founding executive director of Sisters in Islam, an NGO in Malaysia which she led for nearly 20 years. She has also served on Malaysia's Human Rights Commission. Today, we'll talk about equality and justice in Muslim communities. Zainah, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Why is there a need for a global movement for equality and justice in Muslim families? What particular challenges are you trying to address?
Well, the issue of discrimination. Discrimination against women is justified in the name of Islam. Religion is used to perpetuate the discrimination, to justify the discrimination, and to challenge that discrimination done in the name of religion, is a lot more difficult than when it's justified, according to other reasons. And you see in a country like Malaysia, which is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country, we have a civil law that regulates marriage and divorce for non-Muslim, where there is absolute equality between men and women. Equal right to marriage, equal right to divorce, equal right to guardianship, equal right to inheritance. Everything is equal, but not for Muslims. So you have a country where you have, in the name of religion, a segment of the population, and in Malaysia is the majority population, and the Muslim women are discriminated against and cannot benefit from the process of law reform in the country and from a government policy that is committed towards equality and towards ending discrimination against women, because it is believed that in Islam, men and women are not equal. We believe that God is just, that Islam is just. So if God is just, if Islam is just, then how can laws made in the name of Islam be unjust and lead to injustice? This, we find absolutely unacceptable. So this is our mission, to make Islam, a source of empowerment, not a source of discrimination, of disempowerment. That we believe that Islam is a revolutionary religion that granted women rights that did not exist in the 7th century, that did not exist in any part of the world, in terms of giving women the right to sign a contract, the right to own property, the right to inherit property, the right to choose her marriage partner, the right to education. All these were rights that were recognized in the 7th century, when the message of Islam was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. If we were true to the teachings of Islam, the Muslim world really would be at the forefront of the feminist movement in the world, instead of now being right at the back.
In Muslim countries or in countries with significant Muslim populations, the legal system usually includes the Sharia law, and people, as you mentioned before, sometimes are denied justice, particularly women and children, because they tend to fall through the cracks between the systems. Would it not be better to have one legal system, one rule of law that treats everyone fairly, regardless of religion, based on human rights, rather than have duality, triple or quadruple systems of law?
Yeah, I think that would be the ideal. Everybody would want to be governed by one system of law and one standard of justice. But we have a heritage. We have the Islamic heritage. We have the colonial heritage, which reinforce that whole separation. The dual legal system that we have inherited, where civil law governs every other issue except the personal status, except the family. Family remains governed by Sharia law in almost all Muslim countries. And it is a difficult struggle to try and remove that, because that is an important source of identity for people. So many women's groups, while there have been groups that have been trying to push for one common law for all citizens, Muslims or non-Muslims, that has not been very successful in many cases. So basically, we have accepted that in the personal status law, the religion, remains a source of law. But where is the place of religion? How should religion play its role as a source of law in a democratic nation state, in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious nation state? This is the challenge now. Nobody is denying that religion has a role to play in the public space. Religion has a role to play in politics. But how do you govern the place of religion in the public space? That is the big challenge now. And the position that MUSAWAH takes, and if you look at the MUSAWAH framework for action, we are saying that yes, religion is a source of law and public policy, but it is not the only source of law and public policy.
Right.
The Constitution, the legal framework of the country, is an important source of law and public policy. International human rights principles are an important source of law and public policy, because our governments are committed to international human rights principles and have ratified all these treaties. The lived realities of men and women in the country are an important source of law and public policy. So what MUSAWAH offers is a holistic framework that links religion, international human rights principles, constitution and legal framework, and the lived realities at 4 different levels. All these approaches must be taken into consideration when we decide, what kind of law should govern us. So, what we're saying is that if Islam is to be a source of law and public policy, then it must pass the test of public reason and public debate. It must be grounded, in the Constitution, in international human rights principles, and in the lived realities of men and women today.
There seems to be a lack of tolerance and acceptance for alternative viewpoints, particularly those that come from women. So how can respect for women and women's viewpoints be upheld and nurtured?
A major problem, or the confusion really in many Muslim communities, is that there is this belief that whatever bears the name of Islam is divine. When you say the Islamic family law, it is not divine law. It is law man-made, created by man. The source may be divine, but the product of human being engaging with the divine source and producing knowledge and fiqh, jurisprudence, and codified law, that is a very human process. I mean, who passed the laws in Parliament and the state assemblies? Human beings. They put up the hand and say, I to the bill. That's not God that's saying I. It's human beings that drafted those laws, debated the laws in the government departments, in the Attorney General's chambers and the ministries and the cabinet, redrafted it, sent it to Parliament, debated it in Parliament, passed by Parliament. It is not God's law. It's human law. It's man-made law. So it is open to change, open to criticism, open to discussion, open to debate, and it's fallible. It is not an infallible divine law. And then when we demand for change, or we say this is unjust, they say, oh, you're going against God, you're going against God's law, you're going against God's teachings. No, we're not going against God. We are believers, we believe in Islam, we believe in God, we believe in Islam as a just religion. We are against what you are codifying as the law of the land, because it is discriminatory towards women. So this is important, for people to be aware, that when women's groups are challenging these laws that discriminate against women, we're not challenging Islam, we're not challenging God, we're challenging the law made by human beings. So this is important differentiation that we must be able to make, because a lot of the debate is very ideological and really based on emotion, and we want to bring this knowledge to the ability to differentiate between what is Sharia, what is revelation, and what is fiqh, what is jurisprudence and man-made and human-created, what is your ibadah, relationship with God, and what is mu'amalah, relationship among human beings, what is universal, what is specific, what is unchangeable, what is changeable. All these important categories of knowledge and that will then enable us to debate, really, because if we want as Muslims, we want Islam to remain a source of guidance, in our lives today, and to make sure that Islam remains relevant to our lives today. You cannot, say that only a certain group of people have monopoly over that knowledge. Because you cannot say Islam is a way of life, Islam is the solution, Islam has all the answers, and then only I have the answer. Then it's totalitarianism. That's a totalitarian state. But we live in a democratic state. We have a democratic constitution. We have a constitution that says everyone is equal before the law, and there can be no discrimination on the basis of gender. So how do we deal with that conflict between you saying that only you have the answer, the ulama have the answer, and your answer is, I'm sorry, women do not have equal rights to men in Islam. I'm sorry, you don't have a right to debate me and to challenge me because I have the authority to speak in Islam. Right. Then you have to take Islam out of the public space. If you want Islam to be in the public sphere, to be a source of law and public policy, then it has to be open to public debate and public discussion.
Okay. I think a lot of the problem stem from lack of understanding about human rights. In the Islamic context, and I'm going to make sweeping generalization, there is no freedom of religion for Muslims in some countries. You are born a Muslim, you are expected to remain one for the rest of your life. While Islam stresses that there is no force or compulsion in religion. So how can we strengthen the understanding and respect for human rights within Muslim communities?
If you want to convince people that there is freedom of religion in Islam, that there is freedom of religion as a human rights value and a human rights principle, you must educate the people, who say that this is against the teachings of Islam, that this is actually not against the teachings of Islam. There are about 20 verses in the Quran that talks about freedom of religion. It talks about belief, disbelief, belief, disbelief, belief, disbelief. People going in and out of religion. And the Quran does not prescribe any form of punishment at all, beyond saying that, of course, it is a sin. So the punishment is in the afterlife. God will punish you because you have committed a great sin. But it doesn't prescribe any form of punishment in this life. And yet, we have efforts by governments, by Islamic parties, Islamic groups, that want to prescribe the death penalty for those who leave Islam. And this is totally against the teachings of the religion. And so the issue is, how do we engender a public discussion, an informed public discussion in the public space. And this is a problem in many Muslim countries, because many people fear, we don't want to discuss all these issues in public. One, we're told that only the ulama have the answers, but the answer they give us is death. So then the public space is silenced, and secondly, even people with knowledge, all the scholars of Islam, you talk with them, they will tell you privately, of course there is no compulsion in religion. It is so explicit in the Quran. I can say 90%. I have not yet met a Muslim scholar who says death penalty for those who leave Islam, or that there is no freedom of religion. I've met many Islamist ideologues, of course, but not scholars of Islam who believe in that there is no freedom of religion in Islam. And yet, when there is a debate on the hudud law, whether it's Malaysia, Nigeria, Pakistan, where are all these scholars? Where are their voices to actually educate the public, inform the public, that no, this is against the teachings of Islam. Islam recognizes freedom of religion. In fact, the human rights principle of freedom of religion is a very Islamic principle. So, this is the challenge, and this is how, it's like, how do you get these voices? There are voices like us, human rights groups, women's rights groups speaking out, and we're often discredited, and our legitimacy and credibility to speak on religion is challenged. But, it is also important, that these voices, these Islamic scholars who do have credibility, among certain segments of the population, that they need to speak out. They need to begin to engage in the public space, in the media, and impart their knowledge and share their knowledge and their approach.
Is a certain discomfort, the struggle with the grappling with multiple identities. Because when you're a Muslim, there is pressure to prioritize your Muslim identity over others. So how do you encourage people to accept the holisticness of their human identity and that your Muslim identity does not define you entirely?
Yeah. Well, one is the importance of recognizing your multiple identities. But the other is, even if you prioritize your Muslim identity, why must your Muslim identity be fit into this stereotype of the ugly Muslim, the intolerant Muslim, the backward Muslim, the unevolved Muslim? Why? I am a Muslim, and I believe in justice, and I believe in equality, and I believe in freedom of religion. And I absolutely don't see any conflict between my belief in all these fundamental rights and liberties and my Muslimness. I have absolute faith in God, that these are the teachings of Islam, that there is absolutely no conflict between fundamental liberties and fundamental rights and the teachings of Islam, between freedom of religion, freedom of expression, equality and justice, and the teachings of Islam. That is being Muslim as well. So I think it's also important to recognize that there is diversity among Muslims. And I think it's important for people who talk about Islam as well, and this includes President Obama in his speech in Cairo, to recognize that there is diversity of Muslims out there, and not, all Muslims. I mean, when I worked in the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, some of my colleagues from other cultures, other countries asked me, Zainah, when did you take off the hijab? I said, what do you mean? When did I take off the hijab? I never wore the hijab. But there is this assumption that if you're a Muslim, you must wear the hijab. And then you made a decision, like as if, all Muslims are born with a hijab over their heads, and then at some point in their lives they decided to take it off, and I said, but I never wore the hijab. My mother never wore the hijab, but she never missed her prayers. She prayed 5 times a day, and I know she's in heaven, but she never wore the hijab, and so it's like this idea that if you're a Muslim, you must wear the hijab. If you don't wear the hijab, you're not a Muslim, or you're not a good Muslim. So this really feeds into that stereotype, of the good Muslim vis-a-vis the bad Muslim. And it is important, to recognize that there's diversity in the Muslim world, there's diversity in Islamic law, there's diversity in Islamic practices, and it does not make one,
right over the other.
Whether one is a better Muslim or a worse Muslim. I think the most important thing, is, what is in your heart? What is your niyat? What is your intention? If you mean well, if you do good, you're a good Muslim. You're a good. There's no contradiction between a good human being and a good Muslim.
Ideally, they should be one and the same.
Yeah, it should be one and the same. And certainly, I don't believe that God measures how good a human being you are, or how good a Muslim you are, by how much cloth you have over your body, not just how much cloth you have. Then it becomes a debate in terms of the shape of the cloth, the length of the cloth,
and
the color of the cloth, or cannot wear color, it's too colorful, black is better, navy blue is better, dark brown is better, which was the rule in the Islamic, in Iran, And then when they found out that the depression rate among young girls in schools was so high, they relaxed the rule and said you can begin to wear colors now. I mean, a world in which the only color that exists is navy blue, black, and dark brown. When the natural world is just filled with colors, and you're defying nature, and you're saying the Muslim color, is black, navy blue, and dark brown. That is so unnatural. That cannot be God's teachings.
Okay. And on that note, thank you, Zainah.
You're most welcome.
That concludes our conversation with Zainah Anwar, Project Director for MUSAWAH.